I was just texting
It's-
you. How will I know when to talk?
That's a great question.
We're live on YouTube.
We're live on YouTube. So,
Right now we are.
yeah,
Hello, YouTube.
I did send that link out, so it's possible some people are there. Um,
All right, I'm gonna open it up, everyone. Are you ready?
yeah,
Mhm.
Jenny, feel free to just start out by saying, like,
Ryan, your volume's gone out.
really again?
It did for a second there, yeah.
Huh, okay. If that happens, just warn me.
Okay,
Feel free to tell people, hey, we're gonna let people get in. We're just gonna
okay,
take whatever, and so we don't have to start like boom right at 6. But
okay. Do you
yeah,
want me to say that now?
once we go, we're still in a practice session, so
Okay, so when that goes away,
yeah.
okay.
Turning it on right now.
Hi, everyone. If you're already out there, just bear with us a moment while we let everyone in, and we will get started in just a couple minutes, or maybe before. Someone was kind enough to let me know that we are live, which we do know. Probably someone who knows, like, she's going to say something horrible. Somebody warn her. Thank you. It's an anonymous note, but thank you. Yeah, we know we're connecting technologies here and letting people in. I appreciate that.
We should have some entry music though, or something.
We should, yeah.
You're a pretty good singer, right, Jenny?
No, I am not known
Okay.
for my singing. Yeah.
Dude, okay.
Not in a good way. Yeah. We can, however, put Miss Jolene on camera if anyone would like to observe her.
There she is.
She is really excited about tonight's event. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, hello and welcome. Thank you for being here with us tonight. I'm Jennie Young, and I'm hosting this event, which is the official book launch for my friend and colleagues, Ryan Martin's new book, Emotion Hacks. I want to tell you a little bit about what's going to happen tonight. This is both a book launch and kind of a mini workshop. So we're going to be approaching it in that way. There are going to be some giveaways. We're going to give away some signed copies of the book, some year-long paid Substack memberships, and also opportunities to come to future events. So many of you know a little or maybe a lot about Dr. Ryan Martin, but for anyone who might be new, I'm going to give you a quick bio. He is also known as the Anger Professor on Instagram and TikTok. Ryan is a public intellectual and an expert on emotional wellness and anger management. He helps people master emotional challenges and to harness the power of emotions for personal growth and success. He's been covered in all the major media outlets, too many to name right now, and also delivered a super viral TED Talk that turned into his first book, which is called Why We Get Mad: How to Use Your Anger for Positive Change. And his second book is titled How to Deal with Angry People. And this is book number 3, which we're here to celebrate tonight. Ryan was trained as a counseling psychologist at the University of Southern Mississippi and is the current academic dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at UWGB, where he has been a huge champion of public scholarship, which is something very close to my heart and my values and goals, and to his and to a whole bunch of new colleagues that we're also now working with. So that in a nutshell is my introduction of Dr. Ryan Martin.
Thank you so very much, Jenny, for being here and for doing this. And I wanted to quickly just say something to you and also to to a lot of the people here tonight. It's really important to me that I get to do this with you, Jenny, because I think back to about 2 years ago, when the first words of this book were written. It was you and I at a coffee shop in Green Bay working on it, and so you were there from the very start, and it's nice that you get to be here today as we kick things off. But the other thing is, you have been a real inspiration to me as a colleague and as a friend, and I feel like so much of this book is really informed by your ideas and conversations we've had over the last couple of years, and so it means a lot to me that you're hosting this event tonight. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you too. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So, one of the questions I get asked often is like, why did I write this? And so, one of the things I really like to talk to people about is I actually was inspired to write this book because of a comment that I got on TikTok, probably 3 years ago. Someone I did a post. It was one of those sort of, if you remember, a viral trend of, you know, four things I would never do. And something that I said in there hit a nerve, right? And so a bunch of people kind of responded with, well, you know, that's not true. My therapist tells me to do this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one person responded really, really powerfully and said, well, if that doesn't work, then I'm really out of options here. And I admit, it sort of haunted me a little bit that I felt like, gosh, it's really a problem when people feel like they don't have any tools or feel like they don't have lots of options. And from my perspective, you know, there are so many different strategies that we can use to manage our emotions. There's so many different things that we can do to try and have a healthier emotional life. And so I felt compelled to share as many of these as possible. I started out trying to do that actually just on TikTok, just sharing like, here's one, here's one, here's one. And then at a certain point thought, this isn't doing it justice. I want to try and put it all together into one thing.
Well, and don't you like, I know just from being a person who spends a lot of time on social media, you can absorb a lot of like knowledge and even like nuanced perspectives just from being there. But there's something about having like the actual book, right? Having it all in
Right.
one place. I think what those of us who are presenting on social media, we don't always think about the fact that people are seeing things completely out of order. They're
Yep.
missing huge swaths of information, and then things might not make sense or might be interpreted incorrectly or, you know, in a way that actually works against what they're trying to do. So having it all in one place presented by the expert in the order it should be presented in and you know underscored by the research that informs it. Like this is the way to do it. This is how academics approach things.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's what I liked. And it gave me the chance to really dig into the research on some of these different things. And so the book is really organized around exactly what you're describing. I pick essentially 50 relatively subtle life changes that people can make. And I explore the research on many of them and share that research, some of the most relevant parts, because it's designed to be digestible and relatively quick, right? So that you can say, okay, so this is the research on the value of logging moods, right? Of using a mood log. What does the research on that say? And then you know, here's how to implement it.
All right, so keeping us on schedule here, we're ready to announce the first giveaways. So the first giveaway of a signed copy of the book goes to Molly Roskams. I hope I'm getting that right. And the first paid Substack subscription goes to Maria Hartridge. So what we're doing is asking each person who wins something, because we want to make sure we follow through on this, to email Ryan at angerprofessor, all lowercase, all one word, angerprofessor@gmail.com, and just give us your full name, even if it's in the email address. Please give us your full name and what it was that you won, and then we'll make sure that we get that to you. So congratulations to both of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations to both of you, and thank you very much for being here and for your support. And yeah, we'll reach out and we'll exchange information, and I'll be able to get the book to you and get you into Substack. So
Okay, I'm going to
fantastic.
disappear from screen for a few minutes while we go into the first workshop. Are you ready for that, Ryan?
Yeah, I am.
All
So
right.
thank you very
I'll
much,
be
Jenny.
back.
You'll be back in, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, I hope. Um, yeah, so what I'm going to do is share my screen quick because what I want to do is take you through some of the ideas here, and then we're going to come back for a Q&A that Jenny is coordinating here. So um, if I did that correctly, you should be able to now see my screen. So What I want to start with is a model for essentially why we feel things in a particular moment. And this is what much of emotion management, in my mind, should be all about. That when we experience a strong emotion, positive or negative, it typically originates from some sort of spark, something that happens. Um, Sometimes or usually in the environment around us, but not always, that we respond to. And that spark, that thing, whether it is being cut off by someone in traffic or getting a piece of good news or having someone treat us poorly or whatever that thing is, interacts with our mood at the time, defined broadly, right? And so by mood at the time, I mean, are we tired? Are we hungry? Are we rested? Are we in physical discomfort, too hot, too cold, stressed, or whatever? And then what happens next is we interpret that spark. We interpret the thing that we that happened, the getting cut off in traffic, and we evaluate whether or not it was healthy, whether or not it was good for us, whether or not it was bad for us, how bad it is. This is where we engage in some potentially dysfunctional thinking, where we might use some black and white thinking or what we call dichotomous thinking, evaluating things as all good or all bad. It might be where we label people as fools or idiots or cruel or whatever. It might be where we catastrophize, where we blow things out of proportion and say, this is the worst thing that could have happened. It's going to ruin my day or my week or my career or my life. And from that interpretation comes the emotional feeling, comes the sadness or fear or anger. And this is the part where I think people oftentimes think they're supposed to intervene. Like, this is the point where people, when it comes to emotion management, they say, well, this is where I'm supposed to manage the feeling. I'm supposed to take deep breaths. I'm supposed to ground myself, and all of that works. All of that is valuable. But what we know is along with that, there's actually um, uh, infinite interventions that we can have that can happen anywhere in this process. And so there are ways in which we can make decisions about what sparks or stimuli we invite into our lives. There are ways we can take care of ourselves and impact our mood at the time of at the time of that spark. There are ways that we can think about our thoughts and our interpretations and whether or not we are catastrophizing or thinking dichotomously. And then, of course, there are ways that, yes, we can manage that emotional feeling. And then we can think about how we channel those feelings. What do we direct them? How, or where do we direct them? How do we handle them? And so a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight and a lot of what's in the book is thinking through, well, what are the strategies that we can use at each of these stages? What are the things that we can do in that spark stage? What are the things we can do to take care of ourselves, our mood at the time, and so on? And so what I want to do for the next 10 minutes or so is talk through four specific hacks from the book and then talk about how we can put those things together. And so we're going to start with one of my favorites, and it is the value of spending time in nature. Now, I think a lot of people know this and know that spending time in nature is valuable from an emotional perspective, but I'm not sure how people know how valuable it is, and I don't actually always think we're doing it in the best way. And so I'm going to first start with a study that came out in 2015 that I think is fascinating, that compares an urban walk to a nature walk. And literally what they did is they had two groups. They went for short walks, one in a natural environment and another one in a more urban environment. Short walk, less than an hour. And when they got back, they did a bunch of assessments and they found that the nature group saw a decrease in anxiety, saw an increase in positive mood, saw a decrease in rumination, or the tendency to have these sort of racing thoughts, and then saw just in general these improvements in clear thinking, that their working memory was actually better. And so what we see is that, like, that on the surface tells us right there that a quick walk will help us feel better fast, essentially. But not only that, one of the things we see is that the reason there's really interesting research describing why this is, and it says that. So right now I'm sitting in an office, right? So it's not it's a pleasant office, it's just fine. But part of what's happening is that if I pay attention to it, I can hear my computer running next to me, and I can actually hear a buzz of the lights up above, and I can hear my AC going, or not AC, it's January, my heat going. All of that stuff is stuff that I actually have to push away, right? It's cognitive, in that it's cognitively demanding for me to push away that stuff. And so what we see is that when we're in natural environments, there's less pressure on us to push those things away. And so that's part of why this works, that getting away from these urban environments allows us to be a little bit more centered and a little bit more calm. And then just for fun, just to illustrate that I think we don't always do this in the best way. This is something I'm going to come back to in a little bit, but a 2024 study, so just 2 years ago, came out and found that when two groups, nature walks, people who went out bird watching versus people who just went out in nature and didn't go bird watching, that the bird watchers had better outcomes, emotional outcomes, than just being in nature. So that tells us something about the way in which we approach nature and the impact that it can have. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. Another thing that I want to talk about is the tendency to engage in what we call self-directed shoulds. And this sort of funny to me because I think back to so I've been collecting research, or excuse me, I've been collecting data on anger for the last 4 or 5 years. Some of you who follow me on social media have seen some of the posts about male versus female anger that I've been doing recently. That comes from this study. One of the really interesting findings in this study, though, is that when you ask people who they most often get angry with, their answer is actually most often themselves. 75% of people say they get angry at themselves. After that is relatively close is family. And then after that is politicians, and then other drivers, right? But so the most common source is themselves. Now, the survey didn't ask people why they get angry with themselves, but so in a profoundly unscientific way, I went to social media and just asked people, who do you get angry with? Or when you get angry with yourself, why? And what people told me over and over and over again was when they don't meet their expectations for themselves, when they don't meet their goals, when they don't accomplish the things they want to accomplish, that they get angry with themselves. And so a lot of that you can explain by these internalized expectations, this idea that, hey, I'm putting this pressure on myself to do X, Y, and Z. I don't know where that pressure comes from, but I'm putting it on myself to do these things, and that helps explain a big piece of what is happening and where that anger is coming from. So one of the hacks then is to pay attention to these self-directed shoulds. When are you setting unrealistic expectations? When are those expectations not coming from you, but from other sources that you're sort of internalizing? And to pay attention to those and be aware of them. Another one of my favorites that has been really fun to think about and talk about, and something that I've actually really thought about in my job at work, is the role of engaging with the arts. And so there is this 2022 study where they reviewed 44 different published articles from the last less than a decade on engagement with the arts. And what they found, and what's particularly interesting about this, is that when they did this study, they intentionally left out anything that was designed for therapeutic intent. So they wanted to leave out any community-based arts projects that were designed for a mental health benefit. They said, we're not interested in those. We just want community-based art projects, things that bring the community together to either participate in the creation of art or just observe and watch the creation of art. And what they found is that people who attended those things saw an increase in self-esteem, saw an increase in happiness, and then also saw decreased loneliness. Now, that last piece is probably from the coming together. Other research on engagement with the arts hasn't necessarily shown that decreased loneliness, but arts and crafts research, people who just engage in like painting and drawing and knitting and crocheting and that sort of thing, we see this increase in happiness associated with that activity. This particular study found benefits were greater for marginalized groups. The elderly, women, people of color all saw benefits that were greater than other groups. And then also that active participation in those things was better than just observing the work. So going to a concert is great, or going to a play is great, but what's even better than that is going to a place where you can actually engage in the creation of art. So going to like a painting class or a drawing class or something like that. And finally, I want to talk about having a mantra, and this one I think is really interesting because I think, and I want to hear from people about some of the mantras they have later as we talk through this. But one of the things that I found as I was doing some of the research here was this 2015 study, and this is scientific jargon at its absolute best. They did a study on the prolonged repetitive verbal utterances. And so what they did is they just asked people to silently repeat the word one over and over and over again. So just say to themselves, one, one, one. And what they found is that, and while they were doing that, they were getting an MRI. So we're getting a brain scan. And what they found is this significant reduction in activity in what's called the default mode network. Now, the default mode network is the part of your brain that basically it's what happens when you're not focused on a task and your mind can wander. And, for some of you, maybe that your mind wanders to wonderful things that are happening. And for some of us, our mind wanders to stressors or work or things like that. And so the repeating of this phrase they found led to this reduction in activity in that default mode network. It's basically said, okay, now your brain isn't wandering to those terrible things anymore. What's important about this study is that this was just a single meaningless word. The word itself, in fact, they intentionally picked a word that didn't mean anything to people, that had no significant impact. So it was just a meaningless word. Uh, so imagine if you replace that word with something that is meaningful to you, something that is profound. And so if you pick a mantra, a phrase that serves you and can help center you in those moments, it can have this really positive impact on your emotional life. And that actually kind of comes back to something else that I wanted to talk about. Actually goes back to that bird watching piece before, is that part of what happens. So spending time in nature is great, but part of what happens for a lot of people when they go for a walk, say outside, is that they become really well, their default mode network kicks in, right? And their mind starts to wander, and it starts to wander to stressors or things they have to do or things like that. And that's actually why bird watching was this more effective approach, because it gives your mind something to do. It's a little bit like having that almost like repeating the word one, right? Is I'm giving my mind something to do, and it's to actually look for birds. And so it doesn't need to be bird watching. It could be identifying plants, or it could be searching for other animals or things like that. But giving your mind something healthy to do can be a way of staying away from some of those stressors, staying away from some of those things. So the last thing I want to do before we bring Jenny back for the Q&A is talk, kind of deliver on sort of the book's promise of helping people feel better fast, which is to talk through what managing an emotional moment often looks like. Because people regularly tell me, well, what I really need is a way of dealing with this stressor. I really need, like, I find myself really angry about something and I don't know what to do. I find myself really anxious and I don't know what to do, or really down and I don't know what to do. And so they do things like sit on the couch and they scroll through, they doom scroll, or they watch TV or things like that probably don't always hurt, but they don't necessarily help. And frankly, sometimes they hurt. And so what I want to do is give you sort of what I would consider almost like a 15-minute fix, like an approach you can use in those moments. And it starts with this idea. The first thing you want to do is center yourself. And so you want to embrace one of those strategies that will allow you to kind of calm down in that moment. Things that fall into this category are things like deep breathing, and honestly, a minute of just deep breathing or even less can work here. This is where grounding can work. So you can use what is called the five senses approach of what are five things you can see, four things you can hear, and so on. This is where a mantra can kick in, right? You can gravitate to whatever that phrase is you use that helps you sort of feel more centered. And then when you're done with that, you can distance and potentially distract. This is where Jolene might get to come into play, if she's on board. You can go for a nature walk, or you can, and truly, it doesn't have to be long, 10 minutes. You can, use a coloring book and color or draw. Maybe you want to write, especially like creative writing. And this is a point where you're actually trying to get your mind active. You're trying to keep that default mode network from kicking in. And so you want to focus on something you can do that is active, that'll get your mind off of the thing that is upsetting you. Or you can pet a dog or a cat as a great distraction. And then once you've done that, once you're starting to feel a little bit more centered and a little more calm, this is when I like to encourage people to shift towards some sort of processing or some sort of action. So this might be where you engage in some problem solving, where you say, okay, whatever the thing is that I'm upset about, now that I've been able to calm down, now that I've been able to relax, maybe there's a problem that I can work on solving. Or maybe I can engage in some assertive communication. Assertive communication is I think, a lost art when it comes to emotional wellness that we really need to encourage people to engage in. That can oftentimes help us solve these problems. And then finally, maybe this is the point where you seek social support, where you reach out to friends, where you reach out to people and say, hey, I really need help, or I need someone to talk to, or I need to engage in some way. And so that is what I have for you. And I would love to hear questions either about this or about other things connected to this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can talk. There is a Q&A there. I see a couple of comments already.
Yeah, so yeah, you should go ahead, and if you've got questions for Ryan, it's a good time to start sharing them now. We are going to announce the second set of giveaways. So the signed book is going to go to Claire Marie, and the Substack subscription is going to go to Kathy Burke. So if you could just drop Ryan an email at angerprofessor@gmail.com with your name and what you won, we'll make sure to get you set up there. So I see some questions popping up in the Q&A. So let's go to that. And I know we talk a lot about the emotional challenges of being in the dating market, and Ryan knows that I'm always reading. I mean, I read everything through the lens of Burned Haystack right now because that's where my head is. I saw a lot of intersections. I'm assuming you're okay with answering
Of course.
questions that sort of intersect there.
Yeah.
If that comes up, and we're not trying to encourage, we're not trying to drive the conversation in any way. I'm just saying I
Mhm.
feel compelled to say that since I did post about it at Burned Haystack, you can certainly feel free to kind of bring these things into conversation with each other. I saw a couple of questions that I think make sense to start with, Ryan, because I think they're very sort of like structural. So
Mhm.
the first one says, could I get a quick overview of the book? I think
Mhm.
she's asking about, and there's, I can't see a name for this one, but I think she's asking for structure, which is like, how do you want people to use this book?
Yeah. Yes. So the here's how the book is organized. We'll start there, which is it starts with a chapter that essentially outlines the how and why we feel. So it goes through a couple different theories of emotion, hopefully in relatively clear terms to outline how and why human beings feel. It's very similar to that how we feel model that I described before, but with some other elements thrown in. Talks about what emotions are and how we experience them. And then after that chapter, there are 50 relatively short chapters, each probably 3, maybe 4 pages that go through in this using that same model. So I have, say, um, some stimulus hacks, right? For spark hacks, right? Some mood hacks, some appraisal hacks. These are ways that you can specific things you can do that fall into each of those different categories. My thought and my approach to this is that as people are reading it, there might be some chapters where they know in the first sentence, you know what, this one isn't for me. That's how I'd feel if I were reading the meditation chapter, by the way. This one isn't for me. However, this other one is, or these other ones are, or there are things that maybe people decide to come back to because they realize years later, like, hey, this is a thing that worked for me, or that I want to reinvestigate. So it's mapped out essentially in that way. So my idea is that in some ways it's can even be a reference you can come back to. Does that feel fair, Jenny, as someone who's read it?
It absolutely does. Um, Next question, and there's kind of like a cluster of questions about this concept. People are saying, can you explain what you mean by assertive communication? So maybe that's part one. And then somebody else, Susan Masterson, had posted and said, how can you develop the skill of assertive communication when it is uncomfortable for you? And I think that's something that applies to so many
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah. So let me tell you, I worry that I would argue at this point that assertive communication should be included in lots and lots of therapeutic experiences for people, right? If people are in therapy, one of the things they should be learning to do is to learn to assert themselves. And so to define that somewhat loosely, I guess, what I'm talking about is being able to comfortably state your needs or wants in a conversation in a way that doesn't necessarily interfere with the needs or wants of another person, or at least the needs of another person, or the rights of another person, I should say. And so, because it may interfere with their wants. In fact, it probably does. That's probably where a big part of the problem comes from. And so, the way to learn that is ultimately through practice. It's to be able to like actually, and sometimes you do this, you can practice in advance of a conversation and say, okay, so how am I going to state this? Um, you can uh, sometimes like if you're in therapy, a lot of times what you do is role play those conversations, and maybe that is something that is needed, but the way to get comfortable with it is ultimately to try it and practice in relatively low stakes situations, and then as it works and as you start to get more comfortable with it, you can start to increase the like kind of the who and the when, those things.
Okay, thank you. This is an interesting question from Lisa Martin. She's saying, my anger is usually triggered when someone says something hurtful. It's more of a knee-jerk reaction. How do you handle this?
Yeah, great, uh, great question. I think when people, one of the big questions that comes up for people, one of the big sort of conversation points around emotion is whether or not anger and how often anger is um, really sort of secondary to something else. This is a really common claim. People like to talk about how anger is sort of secondary to sadness or secondary to fear or something like that, and that at the core of it is one of those other emotions. I don't actually subscribe to that perspective much of the time, but I do think it can be true. And sometimes when people respond in that way, meaning that they get they respond with anger when someone says something hurtful to them, it might actually be that that anger is masking some of that that hurt or that sadness. Um, I would also say I don't think there's anything wrong with being angry when someone says something hurtful to you. I think that's actually a really natural, normal, healthy thing to feel. Um, I think the question then really becomes, what do you do with it? And so I think to answer that, the two things I would say, one is I might spend some time unpacking kind of that feeling yourself, where it's coming from and where it started and why that feels like a particular trigger for you. But then the next thing I would probably do is this might actually be a really good time for that assertive communication where you can actually voice to someone, that hurt my feelings and here's why it hurt my feelings. Or that was, that made me angry because it was hurtful. And here's what I'd like you to do differently.
Okay, we've got a dating related question here, and I think it's something that most of us have encountered. She says, when dating, I find that I ruminate and have intrusive thoughts about myself when someone breaks up with me. My initial strategies involve reaching out for social support and journaling, which aren't always effective. Would you recommend doing those things last?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I really like this because yes, it's about dating, but it's also about a lot of things, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right, right. Losing a job, not getting picked for a job, right? Or
yeah,
being left out of a friend group.
yeah,
Yeah, so many things.
yeah, and
Mhm.
so I think that what um what I would suggest is, in some ways, part of this is about deciding what you need in a particular moment, and I think sometimes, and this is sometimes what people actually need is a distraction. And that, the problem potentially with journaling or maybe with turning to friends is that what you're doing is just providing an outlet for that rumination. And that might not really close the issue, right? If you talk to a friend about it, well, yeah, you get support and they probably tell you all sorts of wonderful things that make you feel better in the moment while you're talking to them, but it doesn't really close the loop the way you might need it to be closed. Um, Same thing with journaling is you're sort of immersing yourself in that situation, and there's some really interesting research on the impact of writing in particular, which actually says that what you're describing right now, it says that kind of individual mileage may vary, right? That sometimes it works great for people and sometimes it doesn't work very well for people. And it really depends on where they're at in their willingness to process and their comfort process and what they really need. So I do think there's something to be said for saying maybe what I need right now is a little bit of time and a little bit of space. And the better thing to do is to try and distract myself and to try and give my mind something else to do instead of focusing so heavily on this issue. One of the reasons we ruminate is sort of like getting a song stuck in your head. One of the reasons we ruminate is because there's something left unclosed. And part of the problem, I think, with the examples that we just described is that those are things that we can't necessarily close, right? Like if I didn't get the job I want, or if I get broken up with, I can't necessarily there's no necessarily like, I mean, yes, there's some closure, and yes, there's some time, but sometimes those things just need time more than anything else.
Okay, this next question is kind of interesting and maybe complex because your work and this book is very much about managing emotions so that things don't get out of control, right? But this question is saying, how do I recover when I do snap?
Yeah.
When she says the spark has led to me going into an anger orbit and my emotions are like definitively out of control. What do you do then?
Yeah, this is the question that I I get asked all the time. Like, what do you do? And here's the problem. Here's what makes this so difficult to answer and why ultimately the work has to be done not in that emotional moment. And that is that what you're describing is what some people sometimes call an amygdala hijacking. And what that means is, okay, so the amygdala is this little structure deep at the center of our brain. It's the emotion center of our brain. And when we get really angry or really scared, it fires off these signals and it essentially overrides the rational part of our brain, which is what's called the prefrontal cortex, right? It's a structure right up here. And so we have a harder time thinking clearly, we have a harder time thinking rationally. So in some ways, what this person is asking is almost impossible, right? Because in that moment, because we what we need to do is hit a place where we are thinking rationally, and we're not able to do that in those moments. So, what I encourage people, this is why, in some ways, the work kind of has to be done um, in advance of those moments coming. And so here's what I oftentimes tell people: the first thing you want to do, and it sounds like you've already done this. So step one is met, which is decide, okay, this is not the person I want to be, right? I don't want to be someone who loses control. And to be clear, there are plenty of people who haven't made that decision yet, right? There are plenty of people who don't necessarily mind being people who lose control. The second thing is to look back at those situations where it has happened with kind of a critical eye. And I don't mean like criticize yourself, but I mean evaluating those circumstances and thinking about what you wish you had done differently, where things could have gone differently. So uh, I'm a soccer coach, and I really like watching game tape with my son. And one of the things we do though when we watch game tape is we watch how he performed, and we focus on that. And too often when we think back on those circumstances, we focus on what other people did. And what we need to do is sort of watch that game tape with a critical eye toward ourselves and what we wish we would have done differently or could have done differently. The other thing I would say is we can plan ahead sometimes more than we think we can, and we can anticipate some of those situations and try and prepare ourselves for those situations. Because the goal is always to figure out what is the point at which we're all going to hit a point where we spiral, right? That's going to happen. The goal is to take good care of ourselves so that we're less likely to spiral. And then when we do spiral, it's to catch ourselves as soon as possible. And that happens with practice, and it happens with preparation, and it happens by being able to identify as soon as possible in those circumstances. This is where I need to pause and I need to regroup. And then once I do, that's when I do a deep breathing exercise. That's when I leave the room for a little bit and regroup and then come back, and so on.
We've got a bunch of questions about rumination tonight, which as someone who ruminates, I get. This next one is from Cassie Jones, and she's asking, do you have any advice on helping someone else, maybe a friend or a child who might be ruminating, how to help them from the outside?
Yeah. Um, yes. So, I think one of the things that I do is, we oftentimes, I think sometimes we give bad advice when it comes to rumination, because what we tell people is embrace mindfulness or meditation or a bunch of things like that. And I can tell, I can assure you, as someone who is a ruminator, I can assure you there is nothing that's more likely to make me ruminate than to give me space to just be on my own, right? I mean, that's, and I see Jenny smiling. I imagine that is true for her too, right? If I, this is why I like that bird watching study so much, is because if you just sent me out on a walk, I would spend the whole time thinking about my day and like my work and things like that. If you sent me on a walk and said, Ryan, go identify birds, I would try and do that. And it would take the focus away from my work or whatever. And so I think instead of trying, one of the things we can try and give people a task we can give people is to give them activities that are not stressful, that are that require a teeny bit of cognitive work, but not much. So for me, like one of the things, and some of you know this from Substack, like and this is actually why arts and crafts works is like coloring or drawing or some of those tasks that can, that the person can do that can give them something to kind of focus on, and to take their mind away from that rumination, like bird watching.
Okay, do you want to do one more?
Sure.
Okay, I think this is an interesting question. The questioner writes, one of my big should nots that I get really angry at myself about is when my fear of awkward silence and my desire for connection lead me to consistently overshare personal things with people who do not share meaningful things about themselves with me and who have even used things against me in the past that I've shared with them, and I can't seem to stop doing it. How can I stop? This
Yeah.
resonates so much with me.
Yeah.
I'll do
Yeah.
anything to fill the silence, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely hear that. I think so again, one of the things I love about this question is a person who's already really identified the pattern,
Mhm.
right? And recognizes where that pattern comes from and how it's harmful and all of that. So like uh, job is not largely done, but like well on our way to solving it. I think one of the things that I think is can be really valuable is the planning ahead. And so, if there are particular circumstances in which you do this, it's, if you go into those situations saying, okay, here are the things I'm not going to reveal. Here's the oversharing I'm not going to do. I'm not going to fill the silence. And you make those decisions ahead of time. And then the other thing I would do is again preparing in those circumstances, using some of those, the centering approaches that I talk about, the deep breathing, the grounding, things like that. You go into those situations, um, planning on that. It's a little bit like the advice of if you go to a restaurant and you're worried about overeating, to like look at the menu ahead of time and make your decisions in advance so that when you get there, you're not making decisions when you're under stress or when everything feels good or whatever. It's a little bit like that. If you've made those decisions in advance, you're just more likely to stick to them. The other thing too is again, small doses, small attempts at trying this and praising yourself when it goes well and when you did it, even if it doesn't feel like a huge victory, it's still a little bit better than it would have been, and rewarding that.
Okay, got one more that can you do one more? It's kind of like
Sure.
a like why does this happen? And I think like this seems to me like it might be broadly applicable. Natalie Harper's question. She says, why is rumination so much stronger in a trauma bond? I find a lot of my intrusive thoughts are around remaining no contact from ending a toxic relationship dynamic.
Yeah, I suspect that some of this is going to be um some of this is going to be neurological. That what we're dealing with, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Obviously, all of this is neurological, but some of this is going to be like you had this really powerful experience, and because of that, it has secured or established some pathways that you've been using and using and using. and you are uncomfortable not using those pathways. And so it is truly, one of the things I've really realized lately, and this has been true for me in the last year, is that um, my brain doesn't handle rest very well. It doesn't like it. I'm uncomfortable with that level of like sort of relaxation. And so that's why whenever I have those moments, I gravitate towards things. I gravitate towards work, right? I gravitate towards those things that and in this case, I suspect that what's happening is every time things are quiet, your brain is gravitating where it to the place it wants to go, which in this case is I think the thing it was described like the relationship or the trauma bond, right? And that's where the brain wants to go. And so part of what you need to do is be able to sort of break that cycle. And so when you find yourself doing that, give yourself that distraction that you can embrace to sort of channel things a different way, to maybe force yourself to deal with some uncertainty or the sort of discomfort of not following that. And then over time it gets easier. Over time it gets way easier.
Okay, so there are many questions we did not get to. Ryan's going to talk about how he's going to handle that in just a second. I want to announce the third set of
Oh, yeah.
giveaways. So the signed book is going to Megan Johnson, and the Substack subscription is going to Christine Mahoney. So email angerprofessor@gmail.com and let us know your name and prize. And I'll hand it back to you, Ryan.
Yeah, so first of all, congratulations to everybody. I look forward to signing some books and sending them to you and getting you subscriptions to Substack and all that. I want to say just a couple last minute things here. First of all, the questions we didn't get to, we're gonna Camilla, who we haven't talked about yet, but she's working behind the scenes here, is writing a lot of those questions down so that we can I can keep track of those and I can try and answer them. I think what I'm going to do is answer them on my Substack. So that's a place, and I think Camilla, you're going to drop in the chat, or maybe you already did the my Substack, so you can go follow along there if you are interested. A couple things I just want to say here real quick. One, if you get the book and you appreciate the book, I would love it if you would please leave an honest review on Amazon or Goodreads or anywhere else that you might review books. That really is helpful, not just to me, but it helps other people find the book as well. So thank you for that. Um, I'm also going to everybody who's here tonight, I'm going to follow up with the opportunity for some smaller group sessions if that's something you're interested in. And so I'll chase this with an email to people to say, hey, do you want to do less of a webinar, but more just some Zoom meetings or things like that? I did see a question about book clubs and things like that. I'm happy to be a guest at a book club if that I saw somebody was interested in that, and that would be something that I would be on board for and excited about. Yeah, and so the only other thing I wanted to say before we finish up is I've got some real heartfelt thank yous to say. First of all, thank you to all of you for being here and for supporting this and all of that. I really, really appreciate that. This has been really fun, and it's great to hear from people. I, of course, want to thank Jennie Young for being here and taking the time to do this. Thank you, Jennie. Jennie's book comes out April 7th, by the way, and it's going to be fantastic. So, yes, so yeah. So I'm really, really happy for you, Jennie, but also thankful that you took the time to do this. And then there's two other people who are here that have really helped make all of this run, and I'm super, super thankful. We had a Wi-Fi outage about 2 hours ago that I thought was going to send on campus here, that I thought was going to send all of us into a spiral. But so Camilla Doherty, who is a UW-GB graduate that is now working as my social media manager, and she is fantastic, and she is here behind the scenes. So thank you so much, Camilla, for everything. She's actually like right over there, so I can go. So thank you, Camilla. And then Amanda Wildenberg is here working as essentially the production manager of the show tonight. So thank you, Amanda, for anything and everything. You're amazing. And I'm very, very thankful. So, and thank you to all of you for being here. We are going to finish this up. This will be live on YouTube, though, as well. So we'll be able to, we'll be able to share it out later. So thank you very much.